it seemed like came to a certain point where you're like, I just need to take steps towards that, even if they're not perfect. So
Mhm.
could you provide some practical commentary or encouragement for people that are building things, their own business, they're content creator, they're starting a church, they are writing a script that they hope makes it somehow onto Netflix, and the
Mhm.
roadblock might be kind of the perfect ideal getting in the way of them just acting. So what did you learn about just taking steps in a direction towards that thing and maybe being comfortable with some failure and or maybe
Oh, for
corrective
sure.
data?
Yeah.
We could call it corrective data
Yes.
instead of a
There you go.
failure, right?
There you go. You succeed or you learn. Maybe it's not you fail. Maybe
Ah,
in that
yeah.
ways.
Welcome to Goodmakers. I'm Paul Anleitner, and I am joined in today's episode by Gonzalo Schwarz. Gonzalo is the founder and CEO of the Archbridge Institute, an organization that's dedicated to lifting the barriers to human flourishing. I've known Gonzalo for several years now and have collaborated with him and his colleague Clay Rutledge at the Archbridge Institute on a number of projects. But this is really the first time I've sat down and talked to Gonzalo about his story, about what it took for him as an immigrant coming from Uruguay, having lived in several places all over the world, to build something from scratch, to build something that's making good in the world. And these are the kinds of stories I'm really interested in collecting. Obviously, we're going to still talk about the way that narrative, story, culture shapes our own sense of identity, our narrative identity. And you're going to hear that in Gonzalo's own story today. But we're also going to talk about how we, as people called to lead, to build, people that want to make things, to leave this place better for our kids and grandkids, can actually go about doing that. How we take this shared story, how we take values that we share together and manifest those values, that story in works of art and culture, in building businesses, in starting churches and nonprofits. Whatever good thing you're called to, we want to help you figure out how to do that. And Gonzalo is a great guide in that quest. So without further ado, I want to welcome Gonzalo Schwarz. Gonzalo, thanks for carving out time. I've been so blessed and fortunate to be someone that's collaborated with Archbridge Institute, a nonprofit that you founded, and we're going to hear a little bit about the story in which that came to be and how you came even to be an American and to build something of significance. But I've been really thankful just to be connected to the thing that you have built, and it's brought me into great relationships with people like Clay Rutledge and others. So I appreciate you making some time today, and I'm eager to hear more because we've never talked really about
Mhm.
your own story or how you made something like Archbridge. So thank you.
No, no, thank you, and we're excited to have you on board and learn from you as much as we can. So we're
Yeah,
definitely
thanks,
excited.
Gonzalo. Well, let's start with even your own personal story because we've never even talked about this before. I've heard you bring it up in other interviews, you've written
Mhm.
about it, but your experience of America is very different than
I
mine.
know.
So could you just give us a little bit of your own autobiography here?
Yeah. I don't want to go too much back, but I suppose that informs a little bit of the story. But I'm originally from Uruguay in South America, very small country between Argentina and Brazil. We say we're more about the quality of people than the quantity because we're only like 3.5 million, and I think that's like a suburb or a small city in the U.S. But when I was three, we actually left Latin America, and I lived in Israel for like 7 years. And then after that, just my parents' work, we came back to Latin America afterwards, and I lived in Ecuador and Bolivia as well before ending in the US for my master's in economics at George Mason University in Virginia. But throughout that time, I saw and experienced different things in all those different countries for sure. So all of those experiences inform what I do today or my motivation even to start Archbridge. So I've always wanted to address poverty. Uruguay itself is not very poor. Israel, not as much at the time that I was living there. Obviously, it was still developing and all that, but it wasn't poor by any means. And I'm more from a was middle class, lower middle class family. My parents would would kill me if I say lower middle class, but yeah, we're just comfortable middle class. I would say maybe lower, but it was good. We didn't have any wants or need that much. But then going back to Latin America, living in Ecuador, Bolivia, and I saw poverty firsthand, like every day. And I
Mhm.
wasn't experiencing as much myself, but I was really connected to people there. Really wanted to fix what was going on and try to figure it out. So I started studying economics. I did my undergrad in economics in Bolivia with that goal in mind. My mission in mind was, how do we fix poverty? How do we address poverty? Because I was seeing that firsthand. So that's, in a way, that's how I got into economics, into studying poverty, studying upper mobility, and then when I moved to the US, that was in 2008 to do a master's in economics. And I think a lot of why I ended up studying economics was informed by all those early experiences.
Your primary mission, you guys state at Archbridge is really about promoting human flourishing.
Mhm.
How did your experience of seeing poverty in different places of Latin America, glimpses of it, perhaps even maybe in smaller doses in Israel, how did you begin to connect the that there's a roadblock to human flourishing? Why did you begin to see that poverty was a substantial roadblock to people experiencing meaning, happiness, what we would consider as like a flourishing life?
Poverty was around me during that time when I was in other places. But more broadly, came to see it and being inspired in the United States by people pursuing their meaning, flourishing in life, being entrepreneurial, being able to just have that goal and meaning and chase it, which you don't see that much when you have a different type of mindset in which it's just getting out of poverty, just getting other people out of poverty. But I think it's just a cultural mindset as well that sort of seeps in which you just have to alleviate poverty and not really think about what's the bigger goal, which is, I think, human flourishing. It is about upper mobility more broadly. It's not just escaping that sort of threshold level of what makes me poor, which is whatever poverty level a government sets, depending what the country is. It's not just surpassing that income, just not surpassing that income. It's more about being able to project yourself into the future, to have meaning, to have dreams, to chase them. And that's what I came to see, that it's not only about that just escaping poverty. It's about how can we remove barriers for people to fulfill their fullest human potential, which is a much bigger question, a much bigger endeavor. And I think it's just more inspirational. And what I came to see is that a lot of the work that we do, or people that have interacted in the past see, and I see it myself as well, is that a big part of escaping poverty or being able to chase a dream are barriers to freedom, to your freedom, to individual freedom or economic freedom, in which what you want to do. So some countries, as we see now in cases like we're experiencing now with Iran or Venezuela or other cases, people really don't have the individual freedom to pursue
Mhm.
a fulfilling life. We see economic freedom affecting other countries in Latin America, in Africa, that it's just there's too many barriers for people to open and start a business and all that. So those type of barriers. But at the end of the day, what came to see through all these experiences and through all these countries is that humans, it's not that we're all the same, but we have a lot of more unifying factors about us, a lot of unifying motivations about us that we usually, unless you're born in a country like, I mean, like you're living in a country like maybe North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, you don't wake up wanting more freedom. You wake up wanting a better life for yourself, for your kids, for the country, for your community. You aspire to more than just, I want to be free today, because a lot of our countries, even those that were in poverty, even when I was, as I mentioned, in Bolivia and Uruguay, Israel, even here, we have a lot of freedoms. We can have more. There's definitely a lot of barriers that we need to remove, but there is some freedom in a big way for a lot of people. So it's more about what are our motivations, and for me, it's just people want to flourish in their own lives. People just want to fulfill their human potential, want to help their families fulfill it, their communities, their countries. And I think I came to pivot from that only that poverty, studying poverty, to studying progress, wealth creation, to study human flourishing more broadly, and what are the barriers that stand in people's way that are not going to be just economics, or just in
Mhm.
economic terms. So, in my studies, even as an economist, we're very bad at incorporating, I think, other other ideas, other fields. We think that we have all the answers as economists, but it's not all about economics. And I think you know that well, and a lot of your conversations and ideas stem from that. That it's a lot of it's cultural, a lot of it is motivational, psychological, all that. So what I've tried to do since founding Archbridge is focus in a multidisciplinary, holistic understanding of human flourishing that doesn't incorporate or think about only economics, but also about psychology and culture, cultural attitudes about flourishing, about freedom, about other topics. But anyhow, the idea that that's what I saw. I think that more unifying
Mm,
narratives across all the countries that I lived, and um, a deeper sense of fulfillment pursuit in a way, and not just let's just escape poverty. No, we're gonna get there. So a lot of countries are gonna get there in their development journey. But the idea is that people just wake up wanting more. They always want more in terms of them for to be better, richer, or fuller in terms of their fulfillment. So all of that, I
mm.
think, in the U.S. is encapsulated with the American dream, but I think a lot of countries has have that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I hear you as you describe this. I jotted down a number of words that you used that gave a kind of directional telos, right? So you've said already a few times things like upward mobility, progress, movement, that what seems to really animate you, Gonzalo, is not simply like, do you have a certain dollar threshold in your bank account and
Mhm,
savings? Because that isn't necessarily, there's plenty of people that have much fuller bank accounts than you and I, and yet they don't feel a highly meaningful life. They may actually be horribly depressed and nihilistic. There seems to
mhm,
be something that you're pointing to that we need to have some sense of agency, right? And so a movement from here's my state that I'm currently in to a goal state, people that are in immense poverty lose the sense of agency. Is that fair to say? Is that the maybe deeper spiritual and psychological problem is that when you feel trapped, whether you're whether it's due to corruption, right? Whether it's due to too many regulations that create
mhm.
barriers that make it difficult for you to move from this state to some future goal state, that it seems like what's really driving you is trying to help people find across different domains recovery of their agency. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. That's a big animating question that I have, that we have at the institute, and that I learned a lot more about by working with people like Clay that you've interviewed and that you know obviously very well. But I think it's definitely flourishing. Freedom has needs to have that bedrock basis of agency. We need to feel that we have control over our own lives. In a lot of ways, climbing the income ladder, escaping poverty, doing anything, you need to be an entrepreneur of your own life to start with. You need to set those goals. You need to be able to feel that you have control over that. And in some ways, there's a lot of other barriers that stand in your way that could be, as you mentioned, what we call sort of artificial barriers that are imposed by someone else. It could be a government, it could be even corrupt actors, it could be sometimes even your own family or neighbors or others that are just like limiting what you can do with your agency. And some of those barriers could be even individual or personal, just you feeling you're not in your right state of mind, having mental health issues, being anxious or depressed. And in that sense, what we explored a lot is cultural narratives that sort of lead us to that bigger problems that people talk about in very nihilistic and doomeristic ways, that could have solutions, that we could do something about them. But sometimes what sells in politics or in media is to sell more than nihilism and doomerism, or getting attention for whatever your theory of what's wrong with the world is. So you push a narrative that's very limiting, that scares people away, that think, well, you can't do anything. Everything is structurally against you. So let's just complain about the issue, about the person, about the group of people that are making that problem or that issue, but you don't have agency, so don't even try to act on it because someone is imposing on you. And I think at the end of the day, we all have agency in one way or another, or we can all build towards that. That's what I think I learned a lot by Clay, and I read Viktor Frankl myself, but learning more how um, Clay as well interprets that in his own work, that Viktor Frankl, being a concentration camp, he even thought he had that agency, meaning in his life, to escape that later, to escape that in his mind first, and then they were liberated, to just escape, continue using that agency to build a life after that horrible experience. I think we all have agency in one way or another. It's just how what are the barriers that are limiting it? Is it individual barriers? Is it societal barriers? Are these cultural narratives that we hear, that we see in the media and politics, in movies, obviously, in songs? Sometimes are the cultural narratives that we're being told are that we have less, more or less agency. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to remove barriers from people's way, but they need to take action towards that and to act on their agency and be responsible for their own lives. So in a way, we try to remove that as much as possible through our work, whatever work we're doing in terms of policy, in terms of even pushing back against cultural narratives that are stepping down on agency. But at the end of the day,
Right.
each of us has to act on that agency to move
S-
forward.
So where did you get that wild idea, Gonzalo? I mean, you come and you come to the United States, you pursue a master's degree at a prestigious university. How did that story, because this is
Mhm.
obviously not a story that all cultures or even within our own American culture, we've got these competing stories about what the good life looks like that have varying degrees of maybe celebrating a kind of spiritual and personal hero's journey where you move from a goal starting state into some goal state, and there's a character development process, and that character development leads to the benefit of others. That's a story that isn't universal. So how did that story come to be a story that you lived in? What were those cultural inputs in your life that led you to believe that, yeah, I can move to America and I can start something of significance?
So I think I always wanted, supposed to do something big. I didn't know what it was. I always was trying to act on my agency, as I said, to impact whatever world around me, whatever country I was living in, whatever world around, whatever control I had. I tried to do use my abilities to improve. So I had support from family members for sure, and for things for my parents at some point divorced when I was in my teens, and my dad ended up moving to the United States for another job, and I moved with him for the masters. But as a coincidence, I tried to make it work in Latin America, trying to stay there. My wife, who I'm still married to today, I met her while we were in Bolivia. She didn't want to move to the United States. I tried to find a job after I finished my undergrad, and there weren't a lot of opportunities available. I think there are a lot of people in Latin America that have a big sense of agency, have motivation, are hardworking, entrepreneurial, but there's too many artificial barriers that are imposed that not let people develop and act on their agency as much.
Hmm.
So I faced that in the sense that there weren't a lot of
Such as
opportunities.
what? Like, what would be one of those barriers, Gonzalo?
I think a big barrier is job creation and entrepreneurship. There's too many barriers, to bureaucratic barriers to open and start a business. I think so. There's very little private job creation. I mean, obviously there is some, but not as many opportunities. As an economist, for example, there I would have had to work either in the central bank, one government think tank that there was there, and some other banks that were hiring, but not for economists, more finance people, I suppose. But there weren't a lot of opportunities that I can use my degree for something useful. But other people face that all the time as well. And they have to do
Mm.
more informal work. There's not a lot of opportunities because of there's less entrepreneurial job creation and less economic
Hmm.
growth. So there's a whole other conversation I think we can have for sure on that, because there's just not fewer opportunities, which is why I think people end up emigrating outside of Latin America or outside of other countries because of that lack of employment.
And you had an intrinsic sense that that there was more, right? So I think, like, this isn't a great comparison, but I think about
Hmm.
my own, like, I grew up in a fairly blue collar Detroit, right? And I tell my kids all the time, like, in my world, your options were you were going to work on the auto line, you were going to be an engineer, or
Hmm.
maybe you could be like a teacher or doctor. There was no one in my orbit that I knew of in my family, in the church I attended. I don't know a single person that started their own business. I mean, in my mind, when you would hear somebody say, I'm going to start my own business, it would be something akin to hearing like an 18-year-old say, I'm going to move to Hollywood and become the next Brad Pitt. That's how like outlandish it felt. And that
Yeah.
was a particular story that was kind of entrenched in our little subculture. And, moving to the Twin Cities, where there's a number of Fortune 500 companies, there was a very different entrepreneurial spirit here that now my kids see all sorts of people around them. Dad
Mhm.
starts business, mom starts business, aunts and uncles, friends and family members, they do that thing. So how in the world are you in an environment where it feels very limiting and very constricting? How
Mhm.
how were you able to even aspire or get a sense that there could be more? Where did that come from?
Yes, and that's I think in a way my story as well, and that no one else that I knew had started something became an entrepreneur. And at that point, when I moved, so seeing there's no opportunities as an economist, I thought, well, I need a graduate degree. There's more opportunities with a graduate degree. So I moved to the United States in search of that. My dad was already living here, moved with him, studied in Virginia where he was based, and my idea was, okay, with a graduate degree, I can do more. I can try to access more opportunities, either teaching, either public policy research, something else. But when I moved to the United States, I saw that. I saw more of that entrepreneurial job creation. I saw more of the private sector having more of a say. And in my studies too, in economics, I moved from what I was being taught in Latin America was more of a top-down approach that the government needs to sort of set priorities, set 5-year plans, and how we need to develop. And there wasn't a lot of talk about how entrepreneurs end up creating jobs and creating companies that hire people out and provide those opportunities. There wasn't a big focus on that and on free enterprise and markets that in the United States, in the degrees that I did, there was, but also just moving to the United States and seeing that in person, seeing that people can set big dreams or set goals and achieve them and pursue them. There was a lot of not being able to do that in Latin America because of even just rule of law issues as well. That because of the bureaucracy, because of those barriers, it creates a lot of rule of law issues and corruption issues. And it's more about who you know than like more than what you can do. So there's a lot of other limiting factors. But the point is that I moved to study more, to study a graduate degree to get more opportunities. But still, I wasn't didn't know anyone that wasn't thinking about starting my own thing, and I was just working. I was trying to find a job as a policy researcher as well. But there's and so after my graduate degree, I started working in another nonprofit that supports other organizations that do also policy research. And I thought that for me was, I think, is the best industry, the one that I'm in, to affect
Mm,
change in a big way. Because, well, in the government, you still need to do, you can do that. You can affect a lot of people's lives for the better too. It's not only a lot of people complain about the government. I think there's obviously good people doing great work. You can affect a lot of people, but you're still within the government. If you go my sort of thinking at the time also go to the like a big institution like the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, all these international organizations that are trying to help solve poverty and have more resources, have a big say in local politics, policy, and can affect big change. So that was another window, another thought that people that study economics sort of go to and that I thought about as well. You do that, you could go to the private sector and start job and start a company and create jobs. But I think with my background in economics, what I thought, well, a think tank or a nonprofit that does policy research, what they do is they sort of sit in the middle of a lot of these different actors, and they serve as a conduit to and as an independent actor to hold governments to account, international organizations to account, to help policymakers with better ideas in an independent way. If you're working within a corporation and you want to do that, well, there's always a special interest that you're trying to push. Or if you're
mm,
working within the academy, sometimes the academics are things move slower. Things move through things that I liked, obviously a lot, the journal articles and writing. I think that that's the basis of good science too. But just move slower. They don't have that motivation, so things just stay in a shelf in a journal and not get into the real world and have some policy action. And then with the media, you can interact with the media as well and push some more messages. So I think the industry that I ended up in was more conducive to the big goals that I wanted to have in terms of that sort of poverty alleviation or remediation. And then in a way, as I said, later moving to the more flourishing perspective. But now back to that, what I saw, those cultural signals that I saw and when I was in the United States as entrepreneurs really pursuing their dreams, that's what motivated me. In a specific
mm,
instance that I write about is when I went to to Disney World with my family. My son was, I think, a year and a half at the time, and they were doing a lot of there was a lot of games that were being remodeled, were being changed. There was a lot of games that weren't working, but they had these walls like covering the reparations or the changes with a lot of quotes by Walt Disney. little quotes by Disney saying very inspirational stuff about if you can dream it, you can achieve it, if you pursue it, and it just dream big dreams, like things that were really inspirational for me. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because he had that perspective. He built this huge
Mhm.
place. I was at the time, my son was watching a lot of like Mickey Mouse, and I was inspired, was watching with him.
Mhm.
But we were in one of the shows was like when like all the characters were outside of the castle in Magic Kingdom, I think it is. And they were like rehearsing a story, and it was about like, oh, you can be a hero. And all the characters were saying, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that. For me, after reading all those quotes, thinking about an entrepreneur like that created this amazing park, and obviously before that, a lot of movies, and I think a very successful career. What I think he's trying to convey, was trying to convey through these characters, or what the story they're trying to convey, is that you can be whatever you dream. And so that sort of inspired me. And I was like, well, this is very interesting. And I went and got a biography of Walt Disney to see what was his life like. What's great. I just want to learn more about him. And it's just amazing how he really started from nothing. He had, I think there were five brothers or six brothers. Yeah, five brothers and sisters that were just the same middle class, lower middle class family. Their dad wanted to be an entrepreneur and build different businesses, and he had paper routes that he has his kids work on. He has a shop, and the dad kept failing at different things that he was doing, and he wasn't really supporting Walt's sort of thinking about I want to be a cartoonist or I want to do this a job which he
Mhm.
that he that he got into very interested in. And so someone who didn't have success before, who just had a dream of becoming this cartoonist, of building a business with a partner then, and then with his brother who joined him, with a parent that you weren't, maybe he had that entrepreneurial spirit, but he wasn't learning from his success because they kept needing to move because he kept failing at different businesses. But he still had that motivation. He still dreamt. Reading his book, he was in debt for the first, I think, 20 years of the company because he just kept reinvesting the earnings. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't really that successful. And his brother was more in charge, Disney was more in charge of the finances, was always worried about what Walt Disney, okay, we don't have a profit yet, and you still want to reinvest this revenue that we have in the next movie and spend even more. So he was always the one dealing with the banks and the loans. But then after 20 years, they're trying to profit and then obviously built an empire. But the main point was that his parents didn't really support him. He said, well, if you do your paper routes, okay, you can go to these other classes. I think he still got his parents to pay part of it, but he still had to do it himself. He started doing drawings for a dentist, I think it was at the beginning,
Hmm.
for a dentist to get some money out of it. And so it was just this very entrepreneurial story. And then I got what he was saying in the park. Obviously, all these quotes is because his own life was modeled after that. And so all these things make sense. It's like, wow, this is an inspirational story about someone, an entrepreneur who dreamed big and built this empire. And
Mhm.
then the US is just filled with those stories. And obviously, I'd known about some of them, but didn't dig deep. So I started reading more biographies, started reading more about entrepreneurs and businesses and how people here just have that sort of the national ethos of the American dream is about that. I think is about
Mhm.
dreaming. So that's sort of what motivated me into having even bigger dreams. Or then that was I think 2013, 2012, and I opened the Archbridge Institute.
Hmm.
And because at the time I was in this industry, we do need to provide an inspiring unified narrative because I think it's in need, it's in demand. I can go into that.
Mhm.
And I think you know more about that than me, but I thought that there was that need in the market, that no
Mhm.
other thing that was filling that connection between those three pillars that we work on now on the economic, psychology, and culture flourishing, doing it in one interrelated way, multidisciplinary way. So that was a hole in the economics market that I was trying to fill, and just wanting to try it myself. It was just an itch that I had, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, even first entrepreneurs or later entrepreneurs, and in this case, entrepreneur of a think tank, which is more ideas entrepreneur, I suppose, but you still have to fundraise, you still have to sell what you're doing. So it's still, I
Mhm.
think, everything around entrepreneurship applies the same for profit or nonprofit in many ways. So I just wanted to gather myself and improve what is being done in this research field as an organization, innovate. And 10 years in now, I think this year I still have that itch. But at the time I was like, I need to get out there. And I was personally getting a little bit anxious or very nervous about like, no, I want to do this, but I wasn't taking the step. I wasn't taking the jump. So it's like I was frustrated about not
Yeah.
being able, not being able to do it. And so had plans, and I thought about it a lot, trying to get some, maybe a couple of donors, but it wasn't really making that jump. So I just went to my boss at the time and say, "Hey, I want to build this, want to do this. Please give me a few months, about 2 or 3 months, to maybe to train another person later, but to also just telling you up front, I'm going to go and trying to do more fundraising, and even with people that
Hmm.
I was working with before, like donors that I was working before. I didn't want to go behind my boss's back. So, but it was just a moment in which I just had the itch, like I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, to go out there and chase it. But it was
Yeah.
inspired by Disney. It was inspired by all these entrepreneurial stories from other people that just chasing their dreams. So I think for me, doing what I'm doing now and talking with you even is just I'm chasing my own American dream.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's sort of the
That's so
genesis of my.
fascinating,
Sorry for
Gonzalo,
the
because
long
no, no,
explanation.
no. That's really, really fascinating to me because a lot of times, I mean, the stuff I talk about, and I'm very interested in the ways these kind of cultural stories shape our own narrative identity. And I think sometimes I'll even get people that respond back to when I'm making commentary about a film or something. Even I've written recently about maybe even some narrative shifts in Disney's message over time, and people will say things like, "Well, it's just entertainment." And I go, no, 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 no. Roller coasters and
Mm-hmm.
checkers are entertainment.
Yeah.
This is a much more when you understand that we are storied creatures, and this has been, I mean, Clay and I have collaborated on these sorts of dialogues and written together on this for years. When you understand that component, and you see the formative power in someone's story like your own I mean, think of how central Disney as a story factory has
Mm-hmm.
been in American culture, not just American culture, but obviously globally. And the way that Walt Disney's own story mapped onto, something in my forthcoming book that I call the modern story, right? This is a story that goes back to, you can go back to Martin Luther, right? The sense that one lone individual can kind of break out of their what would have been in the traditional story of pre-modernity, that you had an assigned lot in life, right? There was a
Mm-hmm.
cosmic order to everything. You had an assigned lot in life. And the thing was that you were supposed to figure out was how to do that assigned lot as well as you possibly can. And not that there's anything completely wrong with that story. There's a lot of benefit to that traditional story too. But this modern story came about, which was, well, maybe it's not the place you were born into, your status ladder that you were born into, but that you could potentially move out of that you could have some agency to move out of being a peasant, to move out of being, a blue collar kid from Detroit, an immigrant from Uruguay, that you could move from one state to another.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a story that's so deeply foundational in American culture. It comes with its own ditches, but one of the
Mm-hmm.
strengths of which is that it gives people a sense that your life as an individual is significant and you
Mm-hmm.
can matter to other people. I mean, we know this is when we think about the psychological pillars that give us a sense of meaning, we have to feel like we matter to others. That's what significance is. We have to feel a sense of agency, and so even Walt Disney as a early, you could think of him as a creator of a kind of American sacred text in those Disney stories. They had major, major influence on the way we thought about our own stories. And I just find that so fascinating, even just as an illustration for the impact it had in your own story. And you're going, hey, I can actually move towards, I'm in this current state, but I have dreams and aspirations for more, and I'm going to pursue those things. One other thing stood out to me, Gonzalo, and I think as a practical
Mm-hmm.
application, maybe you could give people listening to this, maybe just some practical guidance. You talked about, there was a moment in this journey for you where what you wanted to do with Archbridge was, it was kind of up here, right? It's an idea, it's a vision, a dream. It's in, uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, it's a spiritual entity, right? It's invisible. It's in that sphere that no one can touch or taste, and yet you're trying to figure out how do you make that invisible thing manifest in the real world. And one of the things I find interesting, because I've heard this from others as well, that it seemed like came to a certain point where you're like, I just need to take steps towards that, even if they're not perfect. So
Mhm.
could you provide some practical commentary or encouragement for people that are building things, their own business, they're content creator, they're starting a church, they are writing a script that they hope makes it somehow onto Netflix, and the
Mhm.
roadblock might be kind of the perfect ideal getting in the way of them just acting. So what did you learn about just taking steps in a direction towards that thing and maybe being comfortable with some failure or maybe
Oh, for
corrective
sure.
data? We could call it corrective data
Yes.
instead of a
There you go.
failure, right?
There you go. You succeed or you learn. Maybe it's not you fail. In that more
Yeah.
ways. But it's yeah, no, definitely. That's what I did first. I think is just what people need to do first. Sometimes is put it in writing and just put whatever you have up here in whatever form in writing. There's a great book by a friend of mine, Carl Schramm. He used to head the Kaufman Foundation called "Burn the Business Plan." That you
Mhm.
basically learn by doing. That a lot of the biggest entrepreneurs didn't have really a business plan. They had the ideas. So as I say, like you need to write it down somewhere. It needs to make sense. You need to think about a lot of stuff. Maybe write down the steps that you need to take to start and operate that business or start and get that idea out there. But not a business plan per se. Sometimes people get too involved in that and take too much to not have the perfect business plan or perfect idea. What ended up turning I put it down in a PowerPoint presentation, basically. If I need to pick, why am I doing this? What are the things that I want to get out of the job? So I did like a whole presentation that sort of mapped out to whatever business plan I had at the time. But you need to just put it there. Like, what's your idea? What you want to achieve? At least the bigger goals, at least maybe 1 page, 2 pages, whatever it is. When you write it down, I think it has another effect, and you want to go, okay, I'm going to take these steps. Maybe you can just map out the steps as well. What I did at the same time was, okay, I want to do this. This is a nonprofit. What do? You have to open a business or open an LLC and then apply to the IRS for nonprofit status. So I just, okay, step one, step two, while at the same time, maybe this first step was to write down the idea. So I did just started taking those steps. And even before I went to my boss at the time and said, I need to do it. It's like, if I want to do this, at least I'm going to have everything ready once I started. So I did the LLC, 2 minutes, I think online. You can do it now anywhere, any state. It's very easy. And then the nonprofit part, applying to the IRS, you fill out a form. I didn't even use a lawyer. Just fill out the form, take that step, you send it out. If it says something that's wrong, this is gonna send you back a review or a comment. But I didn't have any of that. But it just took a while to do it, and I sent it out. I think I took more in terms of thinking about a name for the organization than I took to just fill out the form and send. My biggest delay for me was just to think about what's a good name. I didn't tell
Mm.
you anything specific about what we do, but it's just a brand that I could build without having any like skeletons in the closet for because people assign
Yep.
names or ideas.
Yep.
Anyhow, they have. But the point is that I took those steps, and then my first meeting with a donor that I took this great what I thought was a great PowerPoint. And I wanted to do research on social mobility. I thought there was a little big hole in the market on other issues like monetary policy too, and entrepreneurship and rule of law, stuff that I've learned and I saw were like bad for flourishing in other contexts.
Mm.
I thought, okay, this is a hole in the market that I see in these areas. So I took it to that first donor and he's a guy from Wall Street. And it was 4 p.m. I think the market closed. He gave me the meeting right after that. But then it was 20 minutes in, he fell asleep. I saw him like closing his eyes
Oh,
and
no.
falling asleep. So it was like,
Jeez.
okay, maybe this is not the best presentation. Maybe I'm making it too technical. I'm going more too much into the weeds of what I'm doing and not why I'm doing it. A big part of it is
Mhm.
whatever you're starting, whatever you're doing, is have the mission and vision clear and the why you're doing it. Starting with the why. I think there's a great
Mhm.
Simon Sinek book on that. Start with why. And I think I didn't do that much. So I took the other stuff. So I learned from that. The first donor that I go see he fell asleep. The second one was a friend who worked at a foundation. He recommended, well, there's too many topics. Maybe just focus on one. So I chose social mobility because I think it encompasses a lot of these other areas as well. So then I just learned, I basically just, as I mentioned, the Carl Schrum book, where the business plan is just learning by doing. So I
Mhm.
sort of knew a little bit of the ins and outs of how to maybe run a think tank because I was working in one. And what Carl Schramm says is a lot of entrepreneurs start later in life. So it's not like new story, like the stories about like the younger entrepreneurs like Zuckerberg or Patrick Collison from Stripe or other young entrepreneurs. That's not the norm. That's, I think, from what
Hmm.
Carl's research is the exception. People first start somewhere, they learn something on the job, and they take that knowledge and expertise and experience and then build something themselves that they saw as an opportunity to do something else. So the idea is that it starts later. So that's what I did. I had some knowledge, but I never ran an organization myself. So it was the first time I was stepping into that. But you just learn by doing. So
Mm.
I think, we're talking about, it's just that failure of the first meeting. I said, okay, this is a bad idea. I won't do it. Then I was around maybe October, November, and then it took me until March to tell my boss, okay, hey, I want to do this and step out and leave. Because in the meanwhile, I just kept going back to the drawing board. Okay, I'm going to focus on this idea or that. And there was still that itch of like, well, you just have to go out and do it. You just have to go out and meet with more donors, share this idea with other people and see who wants to support you. But it's just taking those steps. And it's just that conversation about talking to my boss was another friend mentor that I had that was saying that I wanted to, she does a fundraising consultancy. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you just talk to your boss who she knew? It's like, maybe he would be supportive of that if that's you really want to make that step, because that's the next step. You really just have to go out there and do it. And so I did. But I think it's just thinking about it on a, as you said, a step by step basis, and whatever you need to do. If you need to, if your next step is, if you making an invention, maybe doing a patent, it could be a next step after you open a business. It could be like, okay, I need to figure out vendors and people who can give me whatever I need to produce my product. It's just it's all step by step. A lot of people get bogged down and think in terms of like, this is too big. It's like, well, if you just breaking down, break it down by those steps and just keep going. I think I lost track of how many times like I was rejected in terms of
Hmm.
meetings or submitting proposals. I think we've grown since we started consistently. We're doing great, but I would think 95% of times that that I've sent a proposal or something, I've been rejected. And it's just, you just have to have that thick skin and keep going. And that's the entrepreneurship way. You just have to keep going and find new ways to discuss your ideas, who to approach in terms of going out and asking for funding if it's a nonprofit, or asking for investment. Anyhow, so just those step by steps. I don't know if
So
it went too
the
much into the
psychological
weeds.
profile of someone that might
Mhm.
have success in this, there seems to be kind of an interesting paradox here, or I don't know what you would call it, right? So you got to have some resilience, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, I can imagine particular people that maybe even I know, or at times in my own life, where they are so committed to the particular image of the thing that they saw in their head, that they continually take feedback. So let's take your first instance of, you make this pitch to a donor and he falls asleep 20 minutes in. One way you could have narrated that into the story of your life was, there's something wrong with that guy,
Mm.
right? I mean, there is a way in which a kind of hubris or an attachment to their vision becomes so strong that they're not able to collect kind of corrective data. So how do you like navigate that? What would be kind of like the psychological profile of someone that can be successfully making things for the benefit of others in the world, not be too deterred by temporary setback, and yet at the same time be able to know when maybe the feedback is, this thing ain't working, or you're not working, right? Or
Mhm.
like, it's not the right time to pivot. When is a roadblock something you don't climb over and it's a sign you're doing the wrong thing? What's the difference, and what kind of like core ingredients do you think that somebody that wants
Mhm.
to make things, they need to have and be able to hold maybe a particular few different values in tension as they navigate building things in the world?
Yeah, I think that you hit it right on the head in terms of grit and resilience being one of the key attributes, and commitment to the idea or to whatever you want, commitment to your dream, to your mission, or whatever you're trying to build and do. And you see it with anyone. You see it with entrepreneurs. You see it with with the sports. In
Mhm.
sports, you see it with I'm not saying Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, but you see them in those type of people who were obsessed
Yeah.
with what they wanted to do. They had a commitment, resilience, they had failure. Roger Federer, obviously a great tennis player. I think one of the injuries is just counting how many games he lost. You see that people are always focused on that improvement. And I think that that's a key attribute, that you need to have that feedback. And the hubris part, I mean, sorry, you need to be able to get that feedback and interpret it in a good way to improve. And if not, I mean, the market will tell you, whatever market you're in, will
Hmm.
the feedback loop will be, you won't get the funding, you won't get to convince other people. And sometimes maybe it is that that particular donor or person you're trying to pitch is not for you. They have an interest, and everyone is everyone is seeking attention of other people in order to get their products out, sell whatever they're selling. So definitely sometimes doesn't have to do with you or the donor. It's just doesn't, it's not a right fit. I think that commitment to the mission and vision of what you want to do, constant feedback loops, and obviously 5% of the times, 10% of the times that I've done it, we've been successful as an organization. We've gotten grants, things are moving along, consistently growing. So there are people who are going to be aligned, that are going to support you, and you just have to keep going and having that greater resilience. And there's no shortcut, I think, around it. There's no like magic bullet. Even at the beginning, you just want that. And I think that that's very representative of the American dream itself. What I learned, I think maybe there's two things I learned a lot of that stuff from reading stories of successful entrepreneurs, successful people. You
Mhm.
just see that as a constant. And we started with Archbridge as a way, because I think that narratives obviously always help. A project called American Originals at the beginning, because that biography by Walt Disney is called Walt Disney: An American Original. So I named it after that as an inspiration. But we
Hmm.
work with a business historian called Gary Hoover, who goes through like the short biographies of entrepreneurs and successful people. And it's always that. It's always setbacks. It's always like climbing back and trying again and finding other ways. And a lot of it is immigrants coming to this country. I think everyone at some point was an immigrant to this country. For example, one story was Madame C.J. Walker, the first self-made female millionaire in the United States, who was born to freed slaves and pursued her way. She was a single mom. So a lot of many more barriers than myself or others have had were successful. The second one, Adolf Zukor, he created Paramount Pictures. And it was a similar story, like a Hungarian immigrant, $20 in his pocket coming. So a lot of these American dream stories, great perseverance, are part of the fabric of the United States. That cultural narrative and fabric of the American dream and as a national ethos is amazing, and no other countries have it. Maybe we can talk about it later, but I think
Hmm.
that sort of that motivation, that's, you keep seeing that repeated in history. And I think in my case too, it's that greater resilience. I think as an immigrant, sometimes you have that already because you're more open to, well, at the time I was a kid as we started moving, and I didn't have a choice. My parents just moved me around, but I was able to adapt to all these different places, and it just became part of my life. And it was difficult to leave friends behind, obviously make new
Yeah.
friends, but I just adapted what I thought. As I saw also, as I said at the beginning, people everywhere are similar. Kids are similar, adults are similar in many ways. Societies are more similar than they are not. So it's less daunting than it could be. But that was already my experience of trying to have that greater resilience. Okay, we have to move again, or we have to go somewhere
Yeah.
else. And then obviously choosing it myself, as I'm making my move, as I'm growing up, it was just became part of who I was. So that's helpful in a way, obviously, in building that psychological traits that I need for that. But nothing prepares you when you're starting your own thing in an entrepreneur, because that failure
Hmm.
can hit hard, because it can hit you take it personally sometimes. You're just like, oh wait, so you don't, this is my idea, it's my thing. So you're saying no, so you don't believe in me. It's like, no, so you have to, you said, like, don't have the hubris and say, well, no, this is just something that didn't convince this person, and you need to improve in how you're pitching it and taking us in. I'm always trying to improve the elevator pitch of how I try to explain what we do.
Hmm.
Why is it that we do what we do? So you always have to have that constant feedback loop and trying to improve. But sometimes it's just hard because you just have to keep moving forward. Another story that we didn't write about, for example, Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, who passed away last year, that he didn't come from poverty, I think, but his idea for FedEx was part of his thesis for his undergrad at Yale. And then people say it wasn't going to work, and he just went out and did it. And there was one story that's sort of famous. It's out there, I think, that he didn't have money to meet payroll the next payroll, I think, and he went to Vegas and gambled the money. And I'm saying that's a great strategy, but like I think he wouldn't have gotten the
I'm
money to pay that.
flipping
He would have
that
done something
story,
else.
that
Yeah.
exact story, Gonzalo. That would be the takeaway from this whole
Yeah.
conversation.
No, no. But like he went out there and he did, and he found, and it was the right moment. He got the funding out of that. But it's just people,
Mm,
entrepreneurs are going to take those risks. They're going to keep being resilient, and it's not for everyone. A psychological trait is not for everyone. And there's a lot of, obviously, there's a lot of great times when you're successful, but there's a lot of, I think, demanding, and I wouldn't say dark times, but like
yeah.
it's just you're on your own in a way. You can have a team that supports you, you can have family that supports you, but when it comes to some moments, entrepreneurs and founders, I think feel alone because it's your vision, it's your how you convince even others, how you convince family members to still be supportive if things are not going well. I mean, we had in Archbridge early history, we had times when we didn't meet payroll ourselves, or that we had to go do part time, but didn't pay myself
Mm,
full time for a few months or a couple of years. I went out and did Uber
mm,
for a few months. We needed to make ends meet, and my family obviously was stressed about it. We were stressed. We pulled through, but I think those no one prepares you for those type of times. And it's just if you're committed, you have that vision and mission in mind of what you want to do, and you think it's still have a chance to succeed in because there is someone who either supports it or says the right thing at the right time, or you see in the market that, oh, that article was well received somewhere else. Oh, that research piece, someone highlighted it.
mm.
All those small signals add up to just you keep going. But it is about like your personal commitment to what you want to do. And that's not easy in a way, but
So you mentioned something about adaptability, right?
Mhm,
And I wonder at times when you think back to some of these stories, especially the stories of immigrants who have come from, you lived in multiple places, and each place
mhm,
has its own different set of life strategies built into their culture for what's successful, what's not successful, different economic conditions. You're learning to adapt to even just the basic things of making new friend groups. I think of military kids or sometimes even like missionary kids who have
mhm,
spent a lot of time moving around and they have to learn in each new school how to make friends. It reminds me a lot. I love basketball, and I grew up playing basketball, and I've coached youth basketball and things like that. And one of the the changes, philosophical changes that I'm kind of seeing, and it has applicability to what you're talking about, is we've seen a lot of millennials raise their children, or Gen X parents raise their children to be one sport athletes. And
mhm,
so the idea was I have to specialize in this thing and master it. So I devote all of my time and attention to it. And there seems to be a lot of data coming out about the benefits of being a multi sport athlete in improving your ability to reach your full potential in the sport that you actually like the most. And the reasoning being is that you learn how to adapt to chaos. So it's not simply that you've mastered particular strategies of particular footwork that's just applicable to that one sport. Is that when you navigate in different environments, you learn adaptability, you learn how to navigate chaos better. And I think about that for those that have stories like you, Gonzalo, that have had to adapt, that there's maybe another component to the successful psychological profile here is the ability to tolerate a degree of ambiguity and chaos and to kind of just get good at, you said the best thing you can do is just to take the first steps. And
mhm,
in taking the first steps, you're stepping into the chaos and saying, I'm going to try to make something out of that. The other thing that really stood out to me is brought up how, even again, reading these stories, whether it's the founder of FedEx, it gave you kind of like a mental map, right? So it's not just that the chaos itself is unmanageable because then you don't know what your first step should even look like. These stories might give you one mental map for, well, my first step could look like their first step. Or I'm
mhm,
deriving from their story some sort of like character profile of what I need to be resilient and adaptable. What do you say to maybe like, I think of particular like Gen X and younger, one of the concerns I've had is the way in which a certain kind of story that I've regularly called and will be calling in my book the anti-story has moved through our culture. And it's produced in people a vision of what the highest good looks like is not so much pursuing a higher good, upward mobility, but it's actually tearing down everything
Mm,
around you that you deem as being corrupt, inept. There is a heightened state of cynicism. I mean, we can see, I mean, Archbridge is probably tracking this stuff as well. We see over the last few decades just continual decline in Americans' trust in institutions. And sometimes I wonder if the institutions themselves are actually that much worse, or if this kind of becomes a self fulfilling prophecy where that's the
mhm.
story we tell. And we think the goal is to rage against the machine, to tear it down, that I'm a victim, that everything's just about power dynamics. How do you see that story, in my generation and younger, being a roadblock to people actually experiencing flourishing, not just as individuals, but even in a community, in a town? What are your thoughts on that kind of story and how it gets in the way of flourishing?
Yeah, no, there's a lot there that I think is very interesting. You're right on a lot of those issues. But yeah, just going back to that maybe first before answering that, the question about adaptability. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. We have that capacity as humans. It's just that sometimes we don't use it, or we don't think we have it, or we're just too stuck in our ways, or and it's just a human sort of impulse to do it or not. And it's just being exposed to different things. But yeah, one of the things about also being adaptable, and it just happens, and kids are resilient, more resilient than we give them credit for. I see it as obviously as a parent. But when I moved to Israel at a big when I was 3 years old, we were there during the Gulf War. So there was a period of 2 or 3 weeks that I wasn't living in a city that where we ended up getting missiles thrown at us. We were close by,
Wow.
but like everyone in the country had to go to school because there was a danger of a chemical attack. Go to school with a gas mask. So we had to do drills. Here, the drills for other stuff, obviously, but there we had to do drills to prepare how to wear their gas mask and how to go to the shelter. And the alarms were in every city everywhere. So whenever the alarm sounds at the drill, it's a real event. And I was, I suppose at the time 7 or 8. So 7 or 8, I had to learn how to do that and go for those 2 3 weeks and go to school with my backpack, with my lunch bag and my gas mask. Well, now and everyone did it, and obviously the war didn't last that long, 2 3 weeks compared to other episodes now, but it's just you adapt to that in that context. And my younger brother was 5 or 6, and he had like a little like it was a little tent he put over his head. It wasn't like a mad gas mask, but like all that and going to a shelter, like the attacks came always like at night. So you learn through that stuff, and people just adapt to what they need. You don't have doesn't have to be that dramatic for us to just understand that humans have that capacity to adapt and be flexible, and it's just a matter of embracing that. But um, but yeah, and then one other thing maybe wanted to say in between the two questions. I don't know why I wrote it down, but it came to me at that point. Maybe it's, as we were saying, like embracing
Uh-huh.
chaos and embracing that as an entrepreneur. And others, one thing that stuck out to me when I read a few years ago, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, was one thing that he was mentioning, talking about chaos and order, and talking about how this thing explained the yin and the yang concept. And what stuck to me, because I've been wanting to do a tattoo on that, and my wife doesn't really let me. But I'm not gonna put her on the spot. But it was just a magnificent, I think, concept. Life is basically you're in between those two all the
Mhm.
time. You're between chaos and between order. And what life is just navigating that path and road between those two. Because you're always gonna have, and there's always some chaos within the order and some order within the chaos. But
Mhm.
not a secret to life, but what people do in life is just trying to navigate as much as they can, being in the middle, because you need both. You need both as an entrepreneur to innovate and to do stuff, to be creative, to be open to the world, to be growth oriented, having a growth oriented mindset, uh, while at the same time needing some of the routines and some order in your life as well. But that's where I think it relates to what you were saying at the end, that we see a lot of these narratives, a lot of this nihilism and doomerism about different concepts, about either people just want to tear things down because they're cynical, or because there's some issues with themselves that they don't work on themselves first and just trying to apply that to the world. We're not a psychologist to go into that, but yeah, so we have others talk about that. But there's, for whatever reason it is, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of big problems in the world. Obviously, climate change could be a big problem. You have polarization. You have a lot of other ideas. But when the messaging that we get from culture, from media, from the movies, from our friends or family, is all about, as I said at the beginning, more about like you can't do anything about it. It's all structurally against you. Everything, it's so bad. Like what's that movie with DiCaprio with the how the asteroid coming down
Uh,
to Earth?
don't look up
Don't
or
look up.
look up, something like
Yeah, I
that.
think so. And I haven't seen it, but it's just like, no, the world is going to end. And it's like, what do we do? Well, maybe listen to a scientist in that case, I suppose. That was the movies thing, but it's like, well, I think where the world is going to end. And it's just, but there's no, but then when people feel that anxiety because all these bad things that are going on, all the structural things that are against you, what actually Clay has written about, we retreat into a defense oriented mindset. And then we're
Mhm.
not open to finding what the solutions are. We're not open to being creative, being entrepreneurial, which has retreat. It's like, say, fight or flight idea. And it just retreat into that more defense oriented mindset. You become more anxious because things make you anxious to continue that. And then you maybe engage into these behaviors that is just fighting, raging against the machine or fighting against the system, but not really fixing the issues. And if you think about things, have a more growth oriented mindset in which we're not feel threatened by these narratives, but we just say, okay, these are challenges that as a human race we've been able to adapt and solve, or as a society been able to overcome whatever issue it is. It's going to be tough. It is a challenge, but how do we go about it to fix that? That change
Right.
of mindsets really makes it or breaks it, I think, in terms of your own lives, in terms of societal, how do we address societal issues? And I think that that's what we're trying to push at Archbridge, having that more of that growth oriented mindset, more action oriented. It has to be about action, taking action to do something and sort of do something for others, for society, for community. But I think a lot of these narratives are very pernicious. And what we what we talk about the work that we do about economic barriers, psychological barriers, but this is more of a cultural narrative barrier that I think is dangerous because you can have like no barriers in your way in terms of like maybe building a business. Maybe you have no psychological issues in your way either. There's no barriers in your way, but you have this cultural narrative. It's like, why would you build it? Why would you do something if if things are going to hell? If we're going to die? If we're all this? And so it's a big, I think, cultural narrative that we need to fight to push back against. And even the recent was a recent Nobel laureate in economics, Joel Mokyr, what he wrote about the success of countries like England or the or the other European countries and in the 15th 16th century was a change of cultural attitudes about commerce, about entrepreneurship, more positive some views. A lot of these cultural narratives, wherever they are, have a lot of effects in other circles of life. So that's why in a way we're
Mhm.
trying to see it as interrelated work. But we need to, I think, take that into account, push back against the cultural narratives. And just from a simple way, I think the majority of people do want to flourish or do want to feel positive. It's just, I'm gonna say, well, we have one shot, I suppose, at this life. Maybe there are more lives later, depending on your religion, obviously, and all that. There's there's definitely uh, a sense that yeah, things could be better. Just have one life. So for me, I think it's a waste of time, of potential, and to not engage in more positive some attitudes, behavior, or cultural narratives in which you just help others flourish as well and
Mhm.
remove those barriers, not engage in those behaviors, just think, okay, let me step back, think maybe what's wrong with my own life that I'm engaging in this, or what am I doing to harm others because I'm not, I'm, I'm sort of not encouraging others to pursue their fullest potential. So I think it's just life is too short for to engage in the other behaviors. That's why I'm sort of motivated to think more about in positive, unifying terms. But yeah, that's a reality and that's out there in the world
Mhm.
that we see it every day in different narratives. So I think you can speak more a lot about that in movies that we see it in other cultural attitudes, and hopefully you'll discuss more of that in your book.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. One last question for you,
Mhm.
Gonzalo, if you have the time. I've been thinking about the ways in which there is maybe our cultural imaginations around human flourishing have been limited. Some of the kind of American dream mentality, especially like I think in my lifetime in particular, has pivoted in a direction that's about kind of the accumulation of individual status, wealth, but it doesn't see beyond one's own lifetime. I think one of the things I'm really interested in doing with this project I'm doing, we're calling Goodmakers, and the people I'm connecting with is trying to recover something. As a practicing Christian in our history and tradition, there was and still is, there was once a more pronounced long-term orientation to the point in which people would start cathedral projects that they knew were not going to be finished in their lifetime and may take hundreds of years. Their children, their grandchildren might not even see it to completion, but they thought it was a worthwhile use of their life to give themselves to that. When we think about human flourishing and this kind of almost like I hear you saying there's kind of like a Pascal's wager almost when it comes to, well, there is this narrative in which this all might be futile and empty and meaningless, right? And we can take the doomer's approach and we can become a nihilist. Or we can say, hey, I got one shot at this. I'm going to risk that my life might actually mean something. Could we even stepping beyond just my own life, thinking about the ways in which we extrapolate to our kids and our grandkids and thinking about, is that risk worth it for them and for our grandchildren? I say yes. So in your own work or the things you're doing with Archbridge, how much time do you spend thinking about kind of beyond the short terms and notions of flourishing that isn't just, well, there's obviously a trade-off. My own happiness right now, I will trade off some of that immediate happiness for the long-term potential of my children, my grandchildren, Lord willing, having a more flourishing life. What are some ways that you think, we could recover a kind of multi-generational, much more long-term oriented picture of human flourishing beyond just our own individual lifetimes?
I think that's what motivates us as a species. What I've am grateful of working with Clay Rutledge, who's an existential psychologist, is that like learning how we are an existential species that is constantly thinking about these type of issues, and what motivates us is that as a species that thinking that we have meaning and purpose in life beyond our own lives. Even in our surveys on the American dream, when we ask people what you think is essential, important, or not essential, or not important for the American dream, people say that freedom of choice on how to live is essential. Like 80 something percent, or 83% of people say it's essential, and then having a good family life is the second one, almost 80%, 79. Then becoming wealthy is way down, only 14% say it's that for them, or owning a house, even, which is more the caricature that we relate the American dream to, owning our house. And I think people just want, in that sense, just want a home. That it's more the sense of the home and the family than it is the actual
Yeah.
physical structure. But I'm not going to digress on that stuff. But people are associating the American dream, which is, I think, even flourishing in the American context, to those things that are more about finding meaning in life. What's that meaning I can find if I exercise my freedom? And I think those are very, very important questions. I don't know if you ever reading about that movie. Sorry, blanking on the name, with Matthew McConaughey.
Interstellar?
Interstellar. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
I got
know.
a whole
I don't
chapter
know.
coming in the book about it, so
There you go. So I,
thanks
I
for the
think, and I
thanks
think
for
it's a
this
that
free plug there.
for sure, for sure. But that's a good thing, a great movie that sometimes I sort of get scared about, think like looking at that story and thinking about it, just because how it depicts the universe being that big. So that's element of time travel, but that connects multi generations. It connects a bigger vision that he had in first when he went into his missions. At the end, how society ended up leaving where they were and finding a solution to their problems, and then
Mhm.
flourishing into multiple generations. I don't know if that's the best metaphor for that question, that movie, but I think it's great because it makes you think about some of these questions, and that's where you can get that sense of awe, or thinking about what is it for us as a species, what the future depicts through movies and culture. But I think it is something that we grapple with, or that we need to grapple with more, that how, and we do it, I think, every day. If you have kids, which is maybe less and less people every time, which maybe that's one of the problems too. People are not having kids too, because they give you that sense of meaning and purpose and make you think into the future. And thinking about those questions, I think, is key. And I do it with my own kids. I do it with, like, as you said, like getting to meet our grandkids and hoping that they have a better life. And I think that that's a human impulse, that we want people to have better lives than we had, our kids or future
Mhm.
generations. but just as an impulse, we're an existential species that thinks about our meaning and purpose later into the future as well. That we want our immediate family, and friends and communities to be better than we found them, and we're trying to build a movement that people can coalesce around a lot of these ideas around human flourishing, so they have a better narrative to hold themselves on, that is not a narrative that's more diverse and nihilistic. But
Mhm.
for me, it's just a first step for generations to come as well. I want to see our work and what we do survive the test of time, that people come back to your writings, Clay's writings, our writing, to say, okay, well, this is a more optimistic, uplifting view of human flourishing. Human flourishing is such a universal, timeless concept. I mean, obviously, with Aristotle, um, more than 2000 years ago, and even later, or even before that, with other people asking themselves other questions, right? With
Mhm.
the bigger narrative story that obviously you talk about more about it. And if we can do, you can put a little bit into the universe of what could be a more optimistic and uplifting narrative people can coalesce around and find inspiration of. That's what we're trying to do. It's always challenging because humans are always going to be humans in that sense, and we're all flawed in one way or another, and we're going to get there through a lot of ups and downs and trial and error, and yeah, just being human.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully stated. So one of the hopes I have, for all of you listening is that, what I'm doing here with this new chapter in Goodmakers podcast and the mission we're doing with the Center of Cultural Renewal and our leadership network is to just make you aware of the kinds of people that may have like-minded values all over this country. And even we'll get some guests from across the pond who have a shared desire for cultural renewal in the West and in particular here in the good old USA. And so in the description below, you'll find a link where you can find out more about Gonzalo's work and the work that happens over at Archbridge. And if you got questions and want to support them, my hope is that you would find out about really good things happening all over our country and it might excite you and you might find some way of participating. So, Gonzalo, I think this is a great introduction to a lot of my listeners to the things you're passionate about that I know that they share an interest and passion in, and you've given them practical ideas for how to pursue the things that they might be called to leave this world a better place for their kids, their grandkids, and to take a few steps closer to the world being set right. So thank you for your time, Gonzalo.
No, thank you, Paul. Thank you for doing this.